Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Kap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to Season 4, Episode 58 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast. We give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail this week, Week 17, your Fantasy Football Championship. And at this point, I'd say the rest of the fantasy football season. But guys, this is it. It is championship week. I hope none of you are playing in Week 18. If you are, I apologize already because we already have CeeDee Lamb ruled out for the last 2 games of the season. And you can't go back into draft prep and say, I'm not taking CeeDee because I think he'll be rested. That's ridiculous. I don't remember the last time that a player was shut down, a star player that was shut down with 2 weeks left in the season. I guess he's maybe hit his contractual bonuses. Maybe he's a bit dinged up. I saw a report about that. But anyway, point being, if you're playing in Week 18, we'll try to help you guys out next week, but we do not recognize Week 18 as championship week. This is championship week, the finale of a fantasy football season. That is why we are here. It's why we've been talking to you guys throughout the season. It's why me and Nick are recording on Thursday night. It is 11 p.m. on the East Coast after a terrible football game from my Seahawks. I'm not even happy about that football game, and we won. That was terrible. The recap, if you didn't see it, maybe you're out, maybe post-Christmas stuff. If you have fantasy players in this game, they did not score, and that's the bottom line.
Yeah, pretty much. I feel like nobody really played well throughout the 3 games. Lamar looked good. Henry looked good. Andrews had a big game. Xavier Worthy. I don't think a single other person outside of defense has played well.
Kelsey had a decent game. Mahomes pretty much had a decent game. I think Mahomes had 3 touchdowns or something. If you spot start a Kareem Hunt, you got gifted a touchdown. I thought Charbonnet looked good tonight, but they did not run the ball well. The line is terrible, but yeah, I mean, maybe some of the defense. If you had the Ravens defense, you got gift wrapped at a gift. So that was the case. So
Texans are
excuse me. We are 3 games down. We are heading into Sunday, Saturday and Sunday. We have 3 games on Saturday, actually. So dropping this episode on Friday morning-ish. Friday morning-ish, Nick. We are going into championship week. I'm not thrilled at my personal 2 championship matchups. I have buzzsaws that I'm running into, but we'll see how things shake out. Nothing's predictable in a 1-week matchup. Anything can obviously happen. So same thing with you guys. So hopefully we can help you guys out on this show. It is our Thursday/Friday show, dropping it on a Friday this week, just to give you guys the most accurate information possible heading into the weekend. Hopefully you guys had a great Christmas if you celebrated. And hopefully we can help you guys out on this show. We were all booming, all bust teams like we always do. But if we do not speak about your players, we have a Sunday morning live show like we also do every Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Make sure to check that out this Sunday for your Week 17 live show. Very excited to help you guys out for championship week. And hopefully we all end Monday night as champions. This is the Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. You can find the show on YouTube and all audio streaming platforms. If you have any questions, it's Twitter and Instagram. Twitter, Primetime FF Pod. Instagram, Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. So we're going to get into our all boom and all bust teams. I'll explain how that works just in case this is your first time listening to our all boom and all bust teams. Hopefully it's not, but just in case, we'll describe how it works. So 7 players on our all boom, 7 player on our all bust. For the boom teams, we'll speak about that first. For the boom teams, it will not be star players for the most part, unless we think they're going to totally explode. But for the most part, it'll be quarterbacks and tight ends outside of the top 5, receivers and running backs, or maybe flex considerations or something along those lines. So you get 7 players from me, 7 players from Nick, totally different players. We do cross references this through our anonymous GM. I believe Nick technically got first dibs on the all boom team this week. So I will let him go first. I always let him go first anyway. But who is your all boom quarterback heading into Week 17 championship week?
I am going with Anthony Richardson going up against the New York Giants.
Man, I just want to cut you off real quick. I handed you Bo Nix because Bo is a great matchup. I really thought you were gonna get Bo Nix, and I did not select him because I thought you were gonna select one of your guys. But that's okay because I'm starting Richardson in a league. So let's hear it. I do want to know. I don't think he practiced today. Did he not practice today?
I did get a report that he was questionable for the game. So if it is not Richardson, I'm happy to pivot to Joe Flacco because we do love Joe Flacco for fantasy based off last year and earlier this year. but I am going to roll out Anthony Richardson as my all-boom quarterback. He has had 5 games since reclaiming the starting position, and those 5 games, 28, 13, 23, 16, 21. His last 5 games, 52 rushing yards per game and 5 total touchdowns on the ground. He has a very safe floor from that rushing upside. He has a very explosive passing game. We know he likes taking those deep shots. You don't need him to complete 20 passes because PPR don't count for passing attempts, for passing, I guess, receptions for the quarterback. It only matters those yards and those touchdowns, and those are numbers that he is able to ramp up with his big play upside, and obviously that safe floor from the rushing upside. So you get the Giants, who have allowed the 7th most points to the quarterback over the last 3 games. It's a big risk for a big reward. I think he's going to absolutely cook them. You watched it 2 weeks ago. Lamar re-entered that MVP conversation for how much he destroyed that New York Giants defense. They struggled with the mobility at quarterback. They struggled against Jaden Daniels twice this year. I think they're going to struggle with Anthony Richardson, and I think he is going to have a very big game in what could decide the future of the Colts franchise if they want to keep him as the quarterback or look to pivot this offseason.
I do want to know that I think Bo Nix is a phenomenal matchup this week. I don't have him as my all boom, but I think Bo Nix is a great matchup this week against those Bengals.
Yep.
I have Bryce Young, though, instead. Bryce Young facing the Bucs defense, been picking at them all season with the quarterbacks, and we reap the rewards from that. So the Bucs allow the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks, an average of 20.8 points per game. Bryce Young is actually your quarterback 10 on the season since week 12. 5 games this week 12, all over double digits, 3 of them over 16. He's really found his way in the second half of the season. And I think halfway through the first half of the season, many were questioning, including us, is Bryce Young even going to be a Panther next year? And now it seems like people are kind of all in on Bryce Young. So we'll see how that offseason goes for the Panthers with Canales, who was one of Joe Burrow's guys up in Cincinnati. He did face Tampa earlier this season. It was week 13. He scored 23.6 fantasy points. I believe that was his 2nd or 3rd highest game of the season. So it's already a matchup that he's exploited. If you're in a deeper league, I'm in a league that Bryce is actually not available in, but it's a 12-man league, and it's a league where I've kind of ping-ponged quarterbacks. Richardson's my quarterback for this week at the moment. But if you're in a league like that where you ping-ponged quarterbacks, 12, 14, if you don't really have a better matchup, I think Bryce will get you a really solid number in your championship week. Running back 1, who do you like?
Well, I'm going to stay with that game then, and we'll go with Bucky Irving going up against that Panthers defense, who allows the most points per game to the running back position, a total of 27.3. That is absurdly high. The Panthers have been absolutely atrocious against that position. Nick, thank you for this stat right here. They have allowed 10 running backs this year to score more than 17 fantasy points. On top of that, Bucky has 17 plus in 4 of his last 6 games. He's going to absolutely cook them. And Nick mentioned it. They played earlier this year, and that week, 27.5, and he was the RB1. I think he's going to maybe not replicate 1, but I think he's going to finish in that top 5, and I think he's going to absolutely dominate and put a bow tie on this rookie season.
I'm putting a star on the all boom team, so I think this star could finish as the running back 1 and win you your fantasy football championships. I'm doing that. It's going to be Kyren Williams going up against the Cardinals, who allow the 9th most fantasy points to running backs, an average of 22.4 points per game. The Rams need to win this game to lock up the NFC West. I guess technically, if they do, if they lose, they face Seattle next week, but they would probably want to lock this up this week if they can. Kyren Williams, running back 8 on the year. He has 9 games over 15 fantasy points. 6 of those games are over 20. He had 15.2 against Arizona in week 2. I know that doesn't scream a big number. However, the Rams kind of got blown out in that game. They were missing Cooper Kupp, missing Puka Nacua, so there's nothing to really balance the offense. Both of those teams are in completely different situations than they were week 2. The Rams are contending for the NFC West, and I think they're a deadly team in the playoffs. The offense can score a ton of points. If you look at the NFC, I mean, the Rams will always be a tough game with the Lions. So if we get that rematch somewhere down the line in the playoffs, the Vikings allow a lot of points to receivers. So I think the Rams can contend with a lot of those NFC teams. Their biggest threat will actually be the Eagles, so they can avoid playing the Eagles. That they probably will. But point being, I think Kyren will be the motor that will get the Rams the win on Sunday, which will be good for my Seahawks. And I think he will you guys to a fantasy football championship. I'm looking at a 30-plus point fantasy performance this week for Kyren Williams.
Bold.
Your second running back, who do you have?
You could have called him a star before the year based on his ADP, but he has not been that. It is my running back, Breece Hall, who has not had a big game since week 11, but I think he's going to dominate the Buffalo Bills, who allowed the 3rd most points to the running back position. The last time he played against Buffalo earlier this year, He was the RB7 on the week, and he did it without hitting the end zone. That is phenomenal to see that production and that usage. In his 3 games he has played in his career against Buffalo, he has averaged 130 total yards per game with a total of 14 targets. That is incredibly high usage. And the first game you had it with the change in offensive coordinator and Ulbrich. So even though it was earlier in the year, you still had the same play caller, same head coach. I think Brees is going to end the season right. I think he's going to cap it off, and I think he's going to have a great game against the Buffalo Bills.
I'm going with Jerome Ford, and I love playing the matchup here. He has 18 plus fantasy points in each of his last 2 weeks since regaining that starting role with Nick Chubb going out, including 24 points last week with DTR as the quarterback. DTR is not throwing the ball a lot. It really was a total rushing attack from both a little bit of DTR and also Jerome Ford. So I think he keeps the ball rolling. The Dolphins have slipped out of top 10 points allowed to the position, but they have been within the top 10 allowing points to the running backs throughout the majority of the season. They have allowed 2 backs to score 15 plus fantasy points against them since week 13 going into week 17. So they are a defense that is susceptible to the run. I think the Browns keep it on the ground this week, and Jerome Ford gives you a nice game here. Really good if you have James Conner and you're worried about that situation or other running backs at this point. And there's a lot of guys banged up, a lot of guys with bad matchups. So if you hung on to Jerome Ford, I didn't in a league that I'm now in the championship, and I wish I had hung on to Jerome Ford an extra week or 2. I can't even imagine who I dropped him for, probably a defense or something like that. But if you hung on to him, congrats to you, and I think you have a good starter here for your championship week. Your first wide receiver, who are you going to go with?
So before I go to the wide receiver, I'm going to jump down to a flex. Our anonymous GM occasionally does make an error or two. I also had Jerome Ford on my all boom team. I'll give you a couple more stats for it. And then later on, I guess I'll give you somebody that I was going to replace him with because I didn't have any notes. But Jerome Ford, since Nick Chubb's injury, has been great. Nick mentioned his last 2 weeks were great. He was a top 10 running back in both of those 2 weeks. He played the 1 game with DTR this year, and in that game, he got 5 catches for 40 yards. So Jameis Winston, we know he likes to look way down the field and pass the ball down there. DTR is looking for those cheap dump offs. It's what is going to help Jerome Ford have that PPR upside and that safe floor in this one.
Yes. Okay. Did you want to go? Oh, I guess you did. Did
Yeah,
you want to replace that later on, or
yeah, I'll go at the end. It's fine.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna go with Mike Evans here. Mike Evans is technically a star, but he's bounced on and off throughout the season. But I think it's worth putting him on here, and here's why. Double-digit fantasy points in all 5 games since coming back from his injury. 2 of those games have been over 25 fantasy points, which is a monster. He had 25.8 in week 13 against the Carolina Panthers. He now needs 91 yards in each of his last 2 games or 182 yards total to hit 1,000 yards on the season for, I think, the 10th or 11th time in his career. He's never missed 1,000 yards. We know that Baker loves Mike Evans, and I think the team loves Baker. I think he's a very team-friendly quarterback. I'm sure they're going to feed Mike Evans this week and next week. If you won your championship last year, it could have been in part for Mike Evans, who had like 250 yards and 2 touchdowns in championship week. Now, he didn't produce leading up to the championship last year, but if you did get to your championship, Mike Evans, he had an awesome week. I think he can do that this week as well. I think you're looking at a game that's 100-plus yards and a touchdown or 2. They're really going to feed him. He could even go for 150, I think, against a divisional opponent and a bad opponent. The Bucs are contending for that division. All signs point to Big Mike having a really good game. The only thing that could stop him from having a top 5 game to me is what Nick mentioned with the running backs. And I wanted to put the running backs as my all boom, both of those backs. That is the only thing that I could see Evans stopping from being a top 5 wide receiver. I think his yards will still be there. His receptions will still be there. I just don't know how many touchdowns he's going to have.
Yeah.
All right. You want to go to your first receiver?
Sure. So I am going to roll out with Tyreek Hill, who I think is going to have a very big game this week. I know we don't like to talk about stars, but this guy has not been a star. He's projected like the 20th most points on the week. But I think he's going to have a huge game against the Browns, who allow the top 10 points to the wide receiver position. In Tyreek's last 7 games, and they've all been with Tua, he has 5 touchdowns. So he has been the red zone target for them. He has been getting the touchdowns, which you really need. Now you're getting the good weapons. You get the better upside, and there's a very good shot that Jalen Waddle does not play in this game like he did not last week. And if that happens, Tyreek Hill will clearly be the wide receiver 1 over here, and he will clearly get a much bigger target share and the touchdown upside, I already mentioned it, is very big in this game. I love this spot for Tyreek in championship week to kind of become a league winner, something that you were hoping you would be throughout the course of the season. Hasn't been, but if you were lucky enough to make it this far with him, I think he's going to deliver for you in this game.
I'm going with Tyreek's teammate in Jalen Waddle, a guy that Nick told you to trade for your playoffs. And unfortunately, he's been injured for your playoffs thus far, but he was playing well previously. 59 fantasy points from week 12 to week 14 before getting injured, just under the average of 20 fantasy points per game. And he's facing the Browns, who have the third most fantasy points. 2 wide receivers, an average of 31.4 points per game. I think both Dolphins wide receivers could have a really big week this week. Ashane's going to catch a lot of balls as well. The Dolphins are contending for the playoffs. They need to win this game to stay in the playoff race. If they lose it, the Bengals, have the opportunity to sneak in there. So I think the Dolphins will win, and they'll put up a lot of yards in the air. So Tua is actually a very playable quarterback as well in this one.
Yeah.
Your tight end, who do you have?
Well, I got my other receiver still, so I will be going with Terry McLaurin, going up against the Atlanta Falcons, who allow the third most points to wide receiver. Terry McLaurin's been on an absolute tear. 21, 27, 26, 17 is the last 4 with 6 total touchdowns. He has been a red zone machine for this team. I think he's going to continue to be a beast in what is the highest over-under of the Sunday slate. I think he's going to have a big game. Nick went bold with his star, predicted 30+. I'm going to do the same for Terry McLaurin. I think Terry McLaurin is going to finish as a top 3 receiver on the week.
All right, so I'm going to go to tight end here, and I'm going to go with Chig Okonkwo. And the last time I put him on the all-boom team, he scored 13.4 fantasy points against the Bengals. And I know it's not a big number, but that's a guy you just picked up off the waiver wire to play in your tight end. So if you made your championship and you don't have a tight end, I imagine you have somebody. Imagine you have Bowers probably, or maybe you have Kittle, etc. But if you don't have a tight end and you need a tight end, I think Chiggy's a good option here. The Jags allow the 8th most fantasy points, 2 tight ends, an average of 11.1 points per game. 9 tight ends have scored 9+ fantasy points against the Jags this season. Okonkwo was not one of them. However, when they played the Jags, he had Will Levis as his quarterback. He has 13+ fantasy points in each of his last 2 games with Mason Rudolph. Rudolph likes to feed him, so I think it's a good spot start here if you do need a tight end at this point in your season. All right, do you have a flex player that you'd like to share, even if you don't have a ton of notes to throw?
Let me give the tight end first, and then I'll give a quick
okay.
wide receiver who was my backup in case Nick took the all-boom priority this week. So I'm going with David Njoku. He is quietly having a fantastic season. Right now, he's the tight end 7 on the year, but he's missed 4 games, and he left too early with injury. So he's only played 9 complete games. 7 of those 9 games, he has finished in the top 10. He's been a top 5 tight end in 4 of his last 5 games. He has 40 targets in his last 3, and that includes DTR. And we were concerned last week that DTR would not target Njoku. He would not have the passing volume that you needed. And we were right. He didn't, but he did target David Njoku heavily, and David Njoku has had a very safe floor. He's been on fire through the later part of the season. I think he continues with that. So here's a quick guy that I would put in the flex spot. Somebody that I think a lot of people are going to bench if they made it this far. In both my leagues that I'm in the championship, ironically, have this guy and have made it to the championship despite him, and it is Cooper Kupp, who in the last 2 weeks put up 0 and 5.4. I love him in this Arizona matchup. They played earlier this year, and in that game, he only had 7.7, but he exited in the second quarter with a leg injury. He was on pace for over 10 catches and over 100 yards. So I think he's going to have a very big game. I know that they have Puka back, who was not there for the first matchup, but I don't think you should bench Cooper Kupp. I think these 2 weeks have been a lull. I think he gets right back to where he was projected to be before the season and where he should finish for the rest of the season.
Okay, I'm going with Brian Thomas Jr., and I'm not sure he's even eligible for the team, but I think he kind of still is. He's your wide receiver 4 since week 13. He has 18+ fantasy points in each of his last 4, including 28+ in each of his last 2 games. He's been a complete monster, matchup-proof monster, quarterback doesn't matter monster. He had 16.6 against Tennessee in week 14. I know it's not the craziest number in the world, but L'Jarius Sneed is also out for the season. All signs point to keeping Brian Thomas Jr. locked in your lineup. Don't even overthink it. Don't look at the fact that it's a Jaguar. Don't look at the sleeper app and see what the color on the matchup is, and just keep him locked and loaded. He'll be good to go. Going to your all bust team, unlike the all boom team, I know we had a couple stars here technically on our all boom teams, but on the all bust team, everybody's eligible stars. We've successfully put the bust tag on guys like Jamar Chase, Jonathan Taylor, Tyreek Hill throughout the season. So, yeah, everybody's eligible at this point. So, who's your all bust quarterback for week 17, championship week?
I am going with one of my guys in Justin Herbert, who I do not think should be started in your championship. He is going up against the Patriots in what is one of the lowest over-unders of the week at 42.5. I know that's actually a fairly decent over-under to be the low on the week, but there's a lot of really good teams playing good teams and bad teams playing bad teams. So a lot of good matchups this week for scoring. The Patriots have been a little bit better than average against the quarterback position, but my concern isn't really with Justin Herbert and the talent. My concern is with the passing volume. The Patriots have not been good against the running back position. Justin Herbert's passing volume has gone down the last 3 weeks with 3 straight games under 15 fantasy points. I don't think they're going to have to throw the ball much. I think they're going to maintain the lead, run the ball. I think you'll see Ladd McConkey not have to play Christian Gonzalez, so you'll see McConkey get the ball in the middle of the field, go down. I think you see a classic Jim Harbaugh game where he just manages the clock, doesn't really want to show Herbert off to be that number one quarterback, which we know he is. We saw it last week. We've seen it in a few big moments this year, but this is not a spot where he needs to do that. This is a win, eat, stay healthy, get home game, because this is all they really need to do. They do not want the Patriots to put any chance that they lose that playoff spot. It is win and in for the Chargers to clinch that spot. I think they do it this week, and I don't think that they're going to risk it with Justin Herbert having to throw the ball immensely.
I have Joe Burrow here, who's been fine the last 4 weeks, 20, 25, 18, 22. The 18 and 22 in your playoffs are a little bit on the lower end, I would say, for him, just based off the fact that he's had a lot of games over 25. But it's a bad matchup, man. The Broncos defense has been great this season. They've shut down a ton of quarterbacks. They allow the 5th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, an average of 16 points per game. They're really tough against receivers. We've seen the Bengals struggle against good defenses for the most part. So I am a little concerned about the fact that he's going up against a really tough defense. And I'm just kind of worried that he gets shut down in a sense where he's scoring under 20. And I think for you to win your fantasy championship, you probably need Burrow to score over 20 because he's probably willed you to the championship. You probably drafted him rounds 5 or 6, your quarterback 5 or 6. And he's the fact that you got him so late and he's been so successful, your quarterback 3 on the season, means you probably drafted well in your early rounds. You probably have, you might have like Chase and Gibbs or something with Burrow. So that's what's kind of willed you to your championship. So I am a little bit concerned with the matchup. And this isn't a bench him situation. This is a temper your expectations because Burrow is not scoring over 20 this week. He might get you 17 or 18, which is a fine number. But if you're going up against an opponent that has Hurts, Allen, even Jaden Daniels that was drafted very late, Lamar, who just had an awesome game, I think you're in trouble. And your opposing quarterback is going to outscore you. That's if Hurts plays, I should say.
Yeah.
All right, your first running back, who do you have?
I'm going with Ramondre Stevenson. Nick, you talked about that
classic guy on this team. Classic all boom, all bust guy.
For sure. Nick, you talked about a low-scoring game. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. I talked about it with Herbert. He has not cracked 13 points since week 9. 13 might seem a little bit high, but I think 12 is like the magic spot for an RB2. You got to get to 12, and I don't think he's going to do it here. The last 2 weeks against teams that were top 5 in points per game to the running back, he averaged less than 11 points per game in those 2. The Chargers are top 10 against the running back position. This is the toughest matchup of those 3 by far. And since Drake May has taken over the starting role, this team has changed to fast first. They are letting him develop as a quarterback, rightfully so. It's what they should be doing. They're getting him the reps. They're making him test the ball. This is a team that falls from behind and typically has to play from behind, and that has just not benefited Ramondre, who is not getting a ton of rushing volume. Because of that, I think this team is clearly going to stick with that pass-first mentality because the Chargers are so good against the running back that they are not going to have that upside in this spot. So it is going to have to be the Drake May show, and I don't think Ramondre is going to get a ton of checkdowns in this one. So I will be fading him, and I do think it's a good spot to bench him if you have a pivot like Jerome Ford.
My first bust here is going to be Rico Dowdle, another one that's been on one of these teams pretty often, especially in the back half of the season. Facing the Eagles defense, who allowed the second fewest fantasy points to running backs, an average of 14.7 points per game. Rico Dowdle only has the Eagles have only allowed 3 touchdowns to backs over the last 8 weeks. As for Rico Dowdle, he had 8.1 fantasy points last week in what was supposed to be a positive matchup against the Bucs. Zeke Elliott actually stole his goal line work. So if you did advance to your championship with Rico Dowdle in your starting lineup, I'm not sure how you trust him this week. He also had 8.6 points against the Philadelphia Eagles in week 10, and now he's missing Dak Prescott, he's starting quarterback, and CeeDee Lamb, starting all-pro wide receiver. If I'm Philly, I'm loading up the box. And I think if you have the Philly defense in your championship, you're going to get a really nice number this week, because I'm not sure how Dallas moves the ball without CeeDee Lamb. So Dowdle, to me, is one you are going to bench this week. And if you've got like Jerome Ford on your bench, he's one who you immediately slot in place.
Mm-hmm.
Your second running back.
I'm going with Isaac Guerendo, who the last 2 weeks has looked great as the RB1. I believe his finishes have 26 and 12 as his 2 games, but he's going up against the Lions, a team that has dominated the running back position all year. Right now, they rank 5th against the position. I think Brock Purdy's actually going to have a huge game. I was debating putting him on the all-boom team because I think this team is going to have to play from behind. It is a high over-under, but they've just been so good against the running back that I am not going to trust the third-string running back for any team to really be good against this Lions offense or this Lions defense. So I think he'll get the lion's share of the work. I just don't think it's going to be too efficient. I think they'll probably put Debo in motion more. I think you'll see a lot more Debo workload. I don't think it's going to be great, but I think Guerendo's really going to struggle in this one. And you're going to kind of see rookie, third string, late drafted guy. I think you'll see a little bit more of that versus any running back for the 49ers works, because this will be by far the toughest matchup that Guerendo will have faced up to this point of his career.
So I made my all boom and all bust teams on, I believe it was Monday night with the fact, or it's Tuesday night or Tuesday morning with the holidays and everything. So we didn't know Guerendo's status. I didn't think he was going to play. So I actually have Patrick Taylor here for the same reason that Nick has Guerendo. The Lions led the 5th fewest fantasy points, 2 running backs, an average of 16.9 per game. We always kind of pick against the Lions defense at this point with the running backs. And Patrick Taylor, in what was supposed to be a positive match against the Miami Dolphins last week, he didn't look good. He only had 3.5 fantasy points. It was kind of the Debo show from the running back position. So, I think all 49ers backs should be benched this week, the same as I think all Bucs running backs should be played this week.
Sure.
Your first receiver, who do you have?
All right, I'm putting the biggest star that you could have put on the all bust team, and it's Ja'Marr Chase, the wide receiver one on the year. Nick already talked about Burrow. Burrow was my initial quarterback that I pivoted off of to Justin Herbert. But Chase is seeing Surtain, which is a horrible matchup for any wide receiver. That is the best corner in football. The last time that they faced, Nick, what do you think Ja'Marr Chase's stat line was?
Against Denver?
Against Denver.
What year was it?
It was 2021, so it would have been Surtain's rookie year.
Okay. Well, I know it's bad based off the fact that you're shouting it. I'm going to guess 2 receptions for 36 yards on 5 targets.
One catch for 3 yards. It is the worst game of his entire NFL career.
Wow.
I do not think you can bench him, but I think there is a shot that he scores less than 10 points, which he has only done 1 time this year, which would suck. Although I will say this, if you have Ja'Marr Chase, he carried you to a championship. So you can't hate him now for getting the toughest matchup in the toughest spot. But I think Ja'Marr Chase has a rough one in for him. I definitely don't think he's breaking 20. I think there's a very good shot he gets less than 10.
I actually think Chase has a great game because just how talented he is. Who I think is going to bust is going to be T. Higgins. That's who I have on the all-bust team for the reasons that the Broncos allow the 5th fewest fantasy points, 2 wide receivers, an average of 24.4 per game. I don't think Surtain's going to travel, and I think they're going to move Chase around. I could see him taking a lot of snaps from the slot, actually. And I think Surtain is actually going to see a lot more Higgins than Chase, and that's what concerns me. Chase doesn't concern me. He's basically matchup proof. I think he had 1 or 2 bad games this season. One of them was the one that I busted him, I think, against Kansas City. But I think he's basically matchup proof. Could you be slightly concerned? Yes, but you're putting him in your lineup. I'm more concerned about T. Higgins, who is not matchup proof, has disappeared in matchups, including that week 14 that you really needed him to get you to a championship in a lot of leagues, and he didn't. So that is my biggest concern when it comes to the Bengals offense this week. Chase Brown will have a great game, by the way. He's been phenomenal. Chase Brown is basically close to 1,000 yards after not starting before week 7. Shout out to me, who said he was going to win fantasy football championships when Zach Moss went down. So pat myself on the back a little bit there. second wide receiver, who do you have?
I'm going with Khalil Shakir. He has not matched up well with the Jets in his career. Nick, I got one more question for you. He has played 5 games against the Jets in his young career. How many catches do you think he has in those 5 games?
10.
5, 1 per game. It has not been a good showing earlier this year when they faced 3.9 points. It was a bad matchup. It has been a bad matchup, and I think it is definitely, you're more than able to bench him and pivot off of him at this point. He's been great. He's offered a safe floor. He has not been big upside, but there is no shot that I am putting him out there against the Jets secondary.
I'm going to go with Jerry Jeudy, and it is a real shame that J-Bo got benched here. This still would have been a tough matchup, I think, even with Jameis. But the Dolphins allow the 6 fantasy points, 2 wide receivers, an average of 24.5 per game. Obviously, Jalen Ramsey's a big reason for that. And Jerry Jeudy only had 4 fantasy points last week without Jameis Winston in a very positive matchup because DTR didn't throw the ball. So it's a shame because Jeudy kind of was on a hot streak. He had that one monster game of Monday Night Football. And without Jameis, he's irrelevant. And that's just the NFL. And that's every Browns receiver because Cedric Wilson was playing very well before the concussion. Njoku, and I know Nick has him on the all boom, but I'm still very weary about DTR starting. But Njoku's stats were going up. I can't believe they benched Jameis, honestly. Maybe they're trying to tank, but I don't know. I don't know. Okay, tight end. Who do you have?
Going with Zach Ertz. Before the bye, he was on fire, 19, 16, 13. Since the bye, he has had back-to-back games under 5 points in each of them. The snap shares also go down, which is the biggest concern of it. So you're not getting the workload. You're not getting the time on the field, even though you looked really good the 3 games before the bye. These are the 2 playoff games that you have played Zach Ertz in. I do not want to risk him out there for a third one.
So I have Jake Ferguson, and this kind of fuels the fire here with CD. So the Eagles will have the second fewest fantasy points, 2 tight ends, an average of 7.7 per game. He's only had double-digit fantasy points once in the last 5 games. It actually was last week. But now without CD, there is really no way to spread the field. The Eagles' defense is going to be swarming around the Cowboys this week. Like, I really think the Eagles are going to crush them. And I know it's a divisional game. I know wonky things happen, but I think the Cowboys have punted on the season at this point. I can't believe that they're going to bring McCarthy back, but Jerry likes his puppets. What could I say?
Yep.
All right. Flex play. Who do you have?
I'm going with Jalen McMillan, a guy that has been on the all-boom team, and he does get this matchup with Carolina. But the last time they played, they had the same exact offense that was rolling out there, and he did not look good in it. He had less than 5 fantasy points. Evans torched him. I believe he had 27. Bucky torched him. He was the RB1 on the week. Rashad White had a fine day, but the game plan is going to be run first, and it's going to be the Bucky and White show. I don't think there's any reason for McMillan to have the big game. If they need the 3rd down conversion, if they need the touchdown in the air, we know it's going Evans' way. So I do not think McMillan can be started in this as great as he has played the last 3 weeks. I think he'll be a better football player than a fantasy player in this one.
I'm going with Jameson Williams, who's actually been on a real hot streak the last month, so it's tough for me to even say this. But the 49ers do allow the second fewest fantasy points, 2 wide receivers, an average of 23.5 per game. They've held wide receivers to less than an average of 64 yards per game. Hill was just held to 29 last week. And they also do allow a lot of points to running back, so I think this could easily be the Jahmyr Gibbs show. This could definitely be a Gibbs as your fantasy workhorse and does a Monday Night Miracle for you. I'm not sure I could bench J-Mo. Like, this is a great guy for those Sunday morning live show questions, not to give a cheap plug, but this is a great guy for your Sunday morning live show because I am concerned about him. But there are definitely guys I'd tell you to play him over just because of how explosive that offense is at times. All right, so that is our last show heading into week 17, our last recorded show. At least if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to drop a like on this video. Hopefully you're subscribed to the channel. If you're not already subscribed, hit that bell icon so you get notifications when we post a new video or go live. We will have our live show this weekend, Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, 9 games to talk about on Sunday. That afternoon slate is terrible, but we're still going to talk about it. And the Monday night game, of course, major fantasy implications on the Monday night game, San Francisco and the Lions. I'm sure if you're in a championship, you at least have one Lion or 49er in your matchup, hopefully on your team, so you have somebody to play on Monday. But again, Monday night live show, Sunday morning, 8:30 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Make sure you follow the show on social media. Twitter is Primetime FF Pod. Instagram, Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. If you have any questions for the Saturday games, you could drop them on our Twitter. Just tweet at us. Don't DM because I don't get the notifications directly, and I missed a couple of DMs, and I feel bad about that. But tweet us directly so we actually get the notification. If you're listening on an audio streaming platform or would like to listen to the show on an audio streaming platform, we're available everywhere: iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. If you're on iTunes or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. Thank you for the support. As always, we'll talk to you guys on Sunday. Best of luck in your championships, week 17.